First video, we're going to be trying to mimic or imitate the look of a handmade, analog-made ink, water-based ink drawing, and working with watercolor wash. So these are materials, traditional art materials that are used to make these styles of drawings. We're going to see working with just the Procreate brushes that are given with the program, if we can try to create that or mimic that look in our digital illustration. So I'm going to switch over to my iPad view and in Procreate, and we're going to work through an inky looking drawing, and also trying to make a watercolor wash of my pie, which is my subject matter. And we're not really focused on trying to make it look realistic. It's really about trying to capture the fluidity of the material like it would be in real life, but working with these digital tools. Okay, so I have here in my layers my subject matter, which is a photograph of pumpkin pie with a bit of whipped cream on top that's been caramelized. And then I went ahead and did a very loose sketch, as you can see, of that pie, just roughed in the shape and a little bit of detail just to get it in place. And that's going to be my starting point. And I'm going to work with ink first. So I'm going to create, I'm going to lower the opacity on this sketch layer so that it's not as apparent. And then I'm going to create a new layer, which will be my ink layer. And I'm going to search for, in my brushes, I'll go to the ink section. And I really like this one, Ink Bleed, because it imitates what ink would do on a paper when it's really wet, and it would absorb and sort of bleed the edge. And in fact, I made a separate ink bleed where I manipulated it to look a little even more watered down. I wanted to show you how you could customize brushes. I like to keep the settings of the original, so I usually make a copy. If I slide my brush over to the right or to the left, I can click duplicate, and now I have two, and you can see the one with the little extra swish at the right side is the one that I've copied. Ink Bleed 1 it's called. And if I click on that, I can, or if I touch on that, I can change the stroke properties. So you could play with these sliders and see what happens, but I might open up the spacing a little bit, adjust the jitter and the fall off so that it becomes a little more bleedy, like it's like the ink is bleeding into the edge, or bleeding into the material, and the paper is sort of absorbing it, and it's very watery. So I'll see what that looks like compared, and maybe I'll give them both a test. So just working with black here. Here's my original ink bleed, and here's my adjusted one. So yeah, very runny. In fact, maybe a little too much. I'm gonna adjust that a little bit more. I like the fall off, but maybe not so much spacing. Okay, so I'm gonna try that again. Yeah, that's nice. All right, I'm going to clear that layer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my pie, but very loosely. I'm not going to worry with when you're working with ink or very watery ink. You can't really get lots of detail. It's not as highly detailed as if you're working with a technical pen. And so we're going to try to follow the material, the way that it would operate. And so I'm going to be really loose and fluid with my line work here. So in my ink, I'm on my ink layer on top of my sketch layer, and I might lower my size of my brush a little bit. I'm just going to be really loose just to get the sort of the shape of this pie in place. I'm going to stylize my whipped cream even. It's not going to be as detailed. Just to get some of the contour lines in place. but not worrying so much about the details. And maybe I'll include, I like the fork there too. And then maybe I'll include the plate in the background. And I'm just trying to be kind of quick. I'll redo that. And not worry so much about exactness. Just getting the fluidity of the material in place. Okay, and I'm going to turn off my sketch line, and there's my ink drawing. If I wanted, I could, you know, clean it up a little bit. Like I have a stray mark over there, but I'm not going to worry about it because we're going to add some more material. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I will drag it underneath the ink layer. I could keep it on top too, but for this I want to, I'm going to do a little bit of ink filling just to put down a little bit of value. But again, I'm wanting it to be really fluid and work like a water-based ink solution. I'm going to go all the way down to the water section in our brushes and choose this wash. I could also try water bleed. Maybe I'll give them both a try, but I'm going to work with the wash first. And it, again, I'm going to work with black as my ink color. And so this brush will really depend on the pressure that you put on the Apple Pencil. So this is a light touch, right? And then if I put a little more pressure, it gets darker. Also, it starts to layer like any water-based material. It'll layer on top and get darker over time. Let me clear that. So looking at my subject matter, I'm just going to look at where the darker values are and put down some ink in those areas. So let's see, I'm going to get a little bit of a smaller brush. I'm going to put some ink behind this what do you call it? Whipped cream, and then some ink down here. I might even work a little bit bigger to put the shadow around the back of the pie. I'm going to layer a little bit more this cast shadow. I might put a little bit on the fork too. Just being really loose though with this ink. And that's about it. If I wanted to try, let's see, the water bleed might give me a more precise placement if I wanted to add a little bit more. But there we have it, an inky, watery pie. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do in this same space is I'm going to work with watercolor washes. I'm going to turn off those 2 layers that I did with the ink, turn back on my sketch so I can see that, and I'm going to make a new layer on top of my sketch. I could work just with watercolor washes, but I like the look of having using sometimes I used to do this working with a water safe archival ink pen, and then putting watercolor to fill in some of the water, some of the color, but just a light touch wash of color. And so I'm going to work with this dry ink pen because I just like the look of that one. You could work with any ink that you want there. And again, I'm not going to draw a lot of detail, but I might have a little bit more than my ink wash. So just getting this whipped cream in place, and then let's see some of the shape of this. Pie crust down here. I like the layering of ink and fill. You can also put it all on one if you like that too, and what happens when they overflow on one another. So again, I'm not worried about it being really precise. I'm just trying to get this mainly the element and the objects in shape. And then I'll work with my watercolor. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm gonna turn off my sketch layer. So now I have just the ink of this pie, and I'm gonna create another layer again, and I'll put that one, I could put it on top or I'll put it underneath. I think either way would work. And I'm gonna choose a paintbrush. So I'm going to painting, and I'm going to work with all the way at the bottom water brush. Just like with ink, water-based media will, if you use a light touch versus pressure, it changes the value. Also, it will layer and build up over time. So I'm going to work with somewhat of the colors of my actual subject, so thinking about the local color, not being subjective yet. And so I'll get like an orangey, a red orange, an orange for my pie. The other thing I like about water-based media is that, especially working with washes, they're diluted, right? They're diluted because they're with water, so it's, oops, I went back to my black. So it's just almost like a tint of color. It's not trying to imitate the full realism of the color that's perceived. So what I have here, and I'm going to work kind of with a larger brush. I'm going to lay down the orange, and as I layer over, you can see it gets a little darker in places. And I sort of like that, what happens when the color bleeds together. In fact, you can also use the smudge tool with the same, let's see if I hold it, it should give me the same brush. And it will kind of blend those colors, although I don't have a lot of other color on there yet. Like with watercolor, I like to play with a few different colors, maybe even sort of blend those around. Am I putting down this other color? Doesn't look like it, does it? I'm going to work with a little bit of like a light yellow to be my crust. And then I'm going to add a little reddish here down in the darker values. And I don't even mind where it's bled over the ink a little bit. I think one thing I'd like to do though is bring my watercolor layer underneath my ink so that the line is a little more consistent and it's black all around. And then I'm going to play with another layer to add value that is a color. So sometimes I like to, instead of just having dark gray tones as my values, I like to work with a color for shadow and shading. So I'm going to work with this purple, blue purple, put some of these down here, particularly pulling out this shadow behind the pie. Just painting around and letting it kind of bleed in some areas more than others. Let's see, I'll put a little bit underneath my fork. Maybe I'll even fill in my fork a little bit with that blue. And with that on an extra layer, it's kind of nice because I can erase separately without taking away what I already built on the other layer. I'm just putting a little shadow in there too. Okay. And you can see what it's trying to do is sort of mimic the way the ink would spread on the page and sort of blend into the other color. So it's got a little bit of that transparency like a water-based media, but we're using it as a drawing tool.